This is CG Ruthless Sports. I will be brutally honest. Ain't nothing but being brutally honest. Coming at you with another video.
Alright, so I'm going to give you guys my 3 49er players who must prove it this year, okay? So I am going to give you some of the players, and this is pretty much pre-recorded because by the time I either record this video, I'm going to either be asleep by then, and hopefully you guys get a chance to enjoy it while I go to sleep, and I'll either wake up a couple hours later. But the point is, I'm going to give you guys the 3 players that must prove it. So I am going to give you the first option, and I'll tell you why. So number 3, in my opinion, I think number 3 in my opinion is definitely Trey Sermon. And I know I'm very big fan of him. I'm pretty high on this guy. I feel like he definitely needs to step up, and he's done well during training camp, which is a good sign. This is definitely the year that he needs to prove it, because you just got a guy to compete for your spot. I mean, you got Ty Davis Price that we just drafted in the 3rd round, and you got this undrafted kid named Jordy Mason, so it's going to be tough. So for Trey Sermon, he just has to keep doing what he does, but he definitely needs to prove that he can fit the system. He has to prove that he's a dependable back, because last year he had one injury with the 1 carry against the Eagles, and then he just wasn't quite getting much playing time from there on. So he was like a non-existence during that season. Like, he had 100 yards rushing and maybe 1 touchdown, but other than that, he still has to compete for some playing time, because Elijah Mitchell is going to be the back, and Elijah Mitchell did add some weight. So that's definitely going to be a factor of how we're going to use our running backs. But then you get a guy like Ty Davis Price competing for that job, competing for that role. And then you got Jeff Wilson still around. Jermichael Hasty still around. And it's going to be tough when it comes down to preseason. He has to step up. He has to prove that he can be the starter, or he can be a good number 2 back. Because at this point, if he becomes our 3rd back, it's pretty much like a disappointment, because I'm very high on this guy and I like him. He's gotten better with the explosive part, so hopefully that translates well during the regular season, because we're going to need Trey Sermon to step up this year. If he can produce, and if he can get somewhere between the 600 or 700 yards rushing as a number 2 back, then that's solid. Then that's good enough for me, because you're getting a good solid backup. But that's my opinion, so I'm going to give you the next option, and I'll tell you what number 2 is. Alright, so number 2, in my opinion, Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks, to me, has to really prove that he deserves that starting job, because they're handing this guy the job. He's getting the left guard job to play next to Trent Williams in the center. So we let Laken Tomlinson go via free agency, and we feel confident with Aaron Banks. The good thing about him is there hasn't been really much bad things about him during this offseason. He's bulked up some muscles. He's gained a little bit of speed. Hopefully that's a good sign. But we all want to hope that he can do really well. But at the end of the day, when I look at it this way, you want this guy to prove that he can be solid. Like, if he can step up and play solid for this offensive line, then we should be good. Even if he's adequate, that's decent for him to play that position. At least he can play solid. Like, be a solid pass blocker and a good run blocker at best. Whatever works. Because we usually run the ball a lot, and we usually get one of those maulers. So we're just hoping that Aaron Banks can step in and do well. Because the pressure on him is pretty much like, dude, we drafted this guy in the 2nd round, so there is going to be a lot of expectation for this guy, because we expect you to replace Laken Tomlinson. Last year, we expected you to compete for a starting job, and you couldn't even beat out Daniel Brunskill. So that's where I have question marks. You definitely have to prove that you do deserve the starting job, because If you are handed this job and you don't live up to the expectation, bro, then it's a disappointment that we hand you the job for no reason. We should always have open competition instead of just handing stuff to guys like Aaron Banks. But in my opinion, when you highly are drafted in the second round and you were redshirt to compete for that spot, more than likely they're going to give the kid the job. So that's my number 2. That definitely must prove it. He must prove that he's worth the starter and worth the pick. Because in the second round, you could have got better options like an Asante Samuel who could have fixed the shutdown corner need at the time. But I must digress and move forward because we're hoping that he can be the guy at the offensive guard spot. So he's playing left guard. He should have no problem with Trent Williams on his side helping him. So it should be a huge benefit for him. So let's go on to number 1. And this one has a lot to prove because I don't even know if he's even guaranteed. But I'll tell you what, number 1, in my opinion, will have the most. He must prove it. He must really prove it if he wants to even make the team. And that's the one that has the most to prove now. So number 1, in my opinion, I want to show you. Okay, so number 1, in my opinion, AmarloLenoir. Why is he number 1? Because in my opinion, he has a lot to prove. Because he's not guaranteed a roster spot. He has to compete to make this roster. The fact that he's not even guaranteed a roster spot is dangerous for him. He has to step up, which he's done well during training camp the last 2 days. He stood out. And if he keeps doing what he does, he will be hard to cut. But I feel like that's the one that must prove it this year. He must prove that he can be a guy that can step in as a backup or maybe step in as a starter when necessary. He has to prove that he's able to play that slot spot because there's an opening spot at the nickel spot. So he does have to prove that he can step in and be the guy. And if he keeps it up, there's a really good chance he can make the team, even if he's a backup. It's just the pressure. The pressure of him competing for a roster spot is going to be a lot hard now because last year it wasn't that difficult for him to even make the roster because all he had was one solid rookie minicamp and that was it. And then preseason he did pretty good. But now this is pretty much where he definitely has to prove it. This is where he has to earn it now. Before that, he was handed the roster spot. This year, he's going to definitely need to put some work in. So in the preseason, we'll find out if this guy can really step into the plate. But at the moment, that's the one guy that definitely has to prove it this year. He must prove it, or else he's cut. That's my opinion. But let me know what y'all think. Those are my top 3 players from the 49ers that must prove it this year. Because those are the ones that were considered disappointments last year. Now this is the year where they definitely can prove themselves this year. So, see y'all later. And hopefully you guys enjoy. And as always, go Niners. Peace.